The rain had started just before dusk, the kind of fine, stubborn drizzle that blurred the glass and made the city lights look like watercolor. I was halfway through answering emails when my phone rang. Mom flashed on the screen, and for a second I almost smiled. It had been months since she called without a reason, but when I answered, her voice wasn't warm. It was deliberate, practiced like she'd rehearsed it in her head. "Olivia," she said, "we've all decided you shouldn't come home for Thanksgiving this year." Just that. No pause, no explanation, just words placed carefully between us like a locked door. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "I shouldn't come," I asked quietly. "Why? Is someone sick?" Her sigh was soft, almost pitying. "There's been tension. Your father thinks it's best we all take a little space." Then the line went dead. No goodbye. Just the hum of silence so thick I could hear my own breath catch. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, staring at the reflection of my apartment window. Outside, rain traced slow lines down the glass, mirroring the pulse in my throat. The cursor on my laptop blinked beside an unfinished invoice. I tried to focus, but the words blurred together. Every year, I had been the one who booked flights, baked pies, covered last-minute costs when Dad forgot to order the turkey. I had shown up even when no one noticed I had arrived. And now, with one phone call, I'd been uninvited from the tradition I had built piece by piece. When the first tear finally fell, I wasn't sure if it was sadness or relief. I wiped it away and opened a new browser tab without thinking, muscle memory guiding me more than reason. My cursor clicked the link I'd typed 1,000 times, the Hartman family account. The balance glowed across the top of the screen, still steady and calm, $950,000. I had managed every cent of it. 6 years of transfers, budgets, tax payments. My fingerprints were on every document, every login, every detail. The number didn't comfort me this time. It mocked me. I leaned back in my chair and whispered into the still air, "So that's how it is." I didn't call her back. Didn't text. I just stared at that balance until the rain outside turned from mist to steady rhythm. My chest felt hollow, but beneath it, something colder was taking shape. A kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. If they could erase me from their holiday table, maybe I could erase the comfort they'd built on my back. The next morning, Portland woke up gray and quiet. The smell of wet pine drifted through my cracked kitchen window. I replayed Mom's voicemail twice while my coffee brewed. Her tone was clean, almost managerial. "We've all decided." Like this was a family vote, and I had simply lost. I saved the recording, labeling it proof. Not for revenge, not yet, but because I needed to see it again, to remind myself this had really happened. I spent the rest of the morning in autopilot, reviewing contracts, sending invoices, checking balances. Every task ran through muscle and memory, but under it all was that phrase echoing in my head. "It's better this way." Better for whom I thought about last Thanksgiving, the tension humming beneath every word. How I'd driven up to Seattle with pies still cooling in the passenger seat, how Ryan, my golden boy brother, had carved the turkey like a conquering hero, while my mother floated around praising his promotion. I'd eaten at the counter because there weren't enough chairs. When Dad raised his glass and said, "To family," I'd smiled because that's what was expected. Now, staring at my laptop, I could finally admit it, I'd been the scaffolding holding their world together. Every utility bill, mortgage payment, property tax, all of it had flowed through accounts in my name. They didn't even remember the passwords. I had created the system that let them forget how fragile everything was, and they thought excluding me would bring them peace. My phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "Don't make this a thing. Mom just wants a calm holiday." Calm. The words sat in my throat like a stone. I typed back then, deleted it before sending. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound small. Outside, the clouds shifted, casting a faint silver across the room. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders and stared out at the city below, cars moving through puddles, strangers hurrying home. Families probably planning dinners, making grocery lists. For the first time, I didn't envy them. I pitied them the way they mistook tradition for love the way I once did. When the coffee cooled, I opened my notebook, the one I used for client ledgers, and turned to a blank page. I wrote at the top family fund. History. My pen moved quickly. Mortgage $1,980 per month, paid by me since 2018. Property taxes 4 times yearly, my transfers. Utilities autopay account registered under O. Hartman. Charity donations, drafted from same fund, my signature. By the time I was done, the page looked like a confession written in numbers. I closed the book and sat in the dim light of my kitchen. The fridge hummed softly behind me. For years, I'd convinced myself that helping them meant belonging. But belonging shouldn't cost everything you have. I poured another cup of coffee, bitter and black, and whispered, enough. By evening, the rain had returned heavier now, drumming against the windows like a heartbeat. I lit a candle on the counter, the flame flickering gold against the glass. The reflection in the window didn't look like me anymore, not the obedient daughter, not the financial caretaker. It looked like someone learning to stand still after years of running toward approval. I opened my laptop again, clicked a new folder on my desktop, and typed 2 words in the title bar: frozen accounts. The glow of the screen washed over me, steady and pale. My fingers hovered above the keys. I didn't know what I'd do yet: transfer, suspend, redirect, but I knew it started here. My phone buzzed once more. Another message from Ryan. Hope you're not planning to make a scene. Let's keep things calm. I stared at it until the words blurred. Then I turned the phone face down, the candlelight trembling beside it. Outside, the rain softened to a steady rhythm, and the city lights shimmered through the mist. I took a slow breath. If calm was what they wanted, calm was what I'd give them, my kind. The kind that comes before the storm. That night before bed, I stood by the window looking out over the quiet street below. A couple across the courtyard was stringing lights along their balcony, laughter spilling into the rain. I felt something shift inside me, not envy this time, but resolve. I whispered into the glass. You wanted peace without me. Let's see how peaceful you feel without power. The candle burned low. The city hummed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small or forgotten. I felt still, like the moment right before a wave breaks. The morning after felt cleaner somehow, the air sharp with rain, and something new: resolve. I woke early, long before the alarm, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook open and steam rising from a fresh cup of coffee. Outside, the city was gray and blurred, the kind of colorless calm that makes decisions easier. I flipped back to the page from last night, the one labeled Family Fund. History, and ran my fingers over the ink. Numbers, dates, transactions. It was my family in spreadsheet form. The evidence of 6 years of quiet servitude disguised as love. I opened my laptop. The account was still there, the balance unchanging, patient. $950,000. Every time I saw that number, I remembered the night it started, the dinner, where my father had smiled like a salesman, and my mother had called it our little safety net. Back then, I believed her. I believed that shared accounts meant shared responsibility. What they actually meant was shared convenience paid for by one person. Me. I logged into the banking dashboard, fingers steady. My cursor hovered over the Manage Permissions tab. There it was, the list of authorized users: Richard Hartman, Margaret Hartman, and Noah Hartman. My name sat quietly at the top as primary administrator. It looked so simple. I clicked edit and the screen asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to change user access? I took a slow breath and whispered, yes. The system prompted me for 2-step verification, a familiar ping on my phone. I entered the code, heart beating steady, not fast. When the update completed, a small green checkmark appeared. The family fund was now under review, frozen, pending verification. The sound of that single click echoed through the apartment like a door closing softly. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was self-preservation. I spent the rest of the morning reviewing documents, mortgage schedules, insurance policies, property tax forms. Every line carried my signature. Every payment came from my account. I'd built their stability the way an architect builds a bridge, invisible when it worked, blamed when it didn't. For years they'd said Olivia's so good with details, as if precision were my personality instead of my burden. Around noon I went for a walk to clear my head. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and silver. A bakery on the corner was pulling fresh loaves from the oven, the scent mingling with the salt of wet pavement. I stood there a moment, watching a mother and daughter share an umbrella as they crossed the street. The girl laughed, her small hand gripping her mother's. The sound was bright, uncomplicated. For a second it made my chest ache. I wondered if I'd ever laughed like that with my mother. I couldn't remember. Back home I found an unread message waiting in my inbox. The subject line read, "Quarterly Family Fund Summary." My pulse quickened. They must have scheduled it automatically months ago. I opened it. The spreadsheet attached was my own formatting, clean columns, blue headers, totals aligned perfectly to the right. The balance still steady, $950,000. Under prepared by my initials glowed OH. Scrolling through, I saw the contributions breakdown. I had entered these numbers myself over the years, but seeing them now was like reading a confession. 87% from me. My parents' contributions barely registered. Noah's negligible. I leaned back in my chair, staring at that percentage, until the numbers blurred. Then I opened another tab and searched for Hartman property title. My name didn't appear anywhere. The house I'd been paying for, the home that supposedly belonged to the family, was registered under Richard and Margaret Hartman. I wasn't an owner. I was an unpaid employee. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it settle in. For years I'd told myself that duty was love, that showing up, fixing problems, and keeping things together made me part of something. But love that demands silence isn't love, it's labor. The phone buzzed on the counter. Ryan again. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again and again until finally I answered. "What do you want, Noah?" His tone was sharp, defensive. "Mom said you froze the family fund." "Is that true?" I didn't flinch. "I'm auditing it." "You can't just." "God, Olivia, you're acting crazy. Thanksgiving is in a week. People are relying on that money for what?" I interrupted. "For the mortgage I pay, the utilities I manage, the donations you take credit for." There was silence, then a hiss of disbelief. "This is about the invite, isn't it? You're being vindictive." I almost laughed. "You think I need a turkey dinner to prove something?" He exhaled loudly. "Mom's been crying all morning." "She's crying because the machine broke, not because she lost me," I said quietly. "And machines only break when someone forgets who's running them." I hung up before he could answer. The room felt still again, heavy with the kind of quiet that isn't empty, it's earned. By late afternoon, the sky had begun to clear. Shafts of sunlight cut through the lingering mist, catching dust motes in midair. I made tea and sat by the window with my notebook. On the fresh page, I wrote a title, Phase 1. Beneath it, I listed each account linked to the family fund, mortgage, utilities, charity account, credit line, insurance. One by one, I drew boxes next to each. I checked the first mortgage and logged into the payment portal. My cursor hovered over suspend autopay. Another prompt appeared. "Are you sure?" Yes, I was sure. The confirmation ping sounded soft and satisfying. I took a slow sip of tea, warmth spreading down my throat. Next came utilities. Electric, water, gas. Each portal recognized me as the account holder. Each one gave me control. With every click, I felt the invisible weight of years begin to lift molecule by molecule. Outside, the clouds parted enough for sunlight to spill across the floor. It felt symbolic, almost cinematic, but I didn't smile. I just breathed. That evening, I cooked for myself for the first time in weeks. Nothing fancy, just roasted vegetables and rice, eaten directly from the pan. I turned off my phone, left the dishes in the sink, and stood at the window again. The rain had dried from the glass, leaving streaks that caught the last of the daylight. For a long time, I watched the street below. Cars moved, people carried groceries, lights blinked on in neighboring apartments. Life continued indifferent, and for once I didn't feel behind it. I felt parallel to it, aligned. When I finally turned back to the table, the notebook was still open, the ink from phase one glinting faintly under the lamp. I added a final line at the bottom of the page. Everything they took for granted, I will take back quietly. The candle beside it flickered, once then steadied. I closed the book, exhaled, and whispered into the calm. Let's see how peaceful they feel when peace stops paying the bills. That night I slept without dreaming. The notification came just after sunrise, password reset requested. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I tried logging in again, but the same red banner appeared. Access denied. I frowned, typing slower this time, as if the computer might sense patience. Nothing changed. I refreshed the page, cleared my cache, even rebooted the router. The error remained. My stomach tightened, not fear, not yet, just a quiet understanding that something deliberate was happening. I reached for my phone and called my mother, straight to voicemail. I tried again. Still nothing. Dad was next, though. He rarely answered, even in emergencies. The call rang twice, then cut off. Ryan's number followed. His voicemail started with that same smug tone I remembered. Hey, this is Noah. Leave it if it's important. I hung up before the beep. Fine. If they wouldn't talk, I'd find another way in. I opened the shared family email account, the one we'd used for years to handle utilities and statements. When I typed the password, a new message flashed across the screen. User permissions changed. Primary owner Margaret Hartman. The timestamp was 2 days ago. 2 days before my mother called to tell me I wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. It wasn't an accident. It was choreography. I switched tabs to the bank portal. The login recognized my username, but not my credentials. Account owner has been modified. At the top, where my name had once appeared there, it was Noah Hartman listed as primary contact. Beneath that, authorized by M. Hartman. They'd moved against me while I was still processing the rejection. Cold, clean, practiced. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then took a breath and started taking screenshots. Every alert, every modification, every access denied. I created a new folder on my desktop, Proof 1 Erasure. The faint click of the camera shortcut filled the silence, rhythmic and precise. I wasn't panicking. I was documenting. Outside, the morning was pale and quiet. The city seemed suspended, like it was waiting for me to decide what came next. I opened my notebook, the one marked Phase 1, and added a line beneath the list. Evidence gathering initiated. By mid-morning, another email arrived. Subject: account ownership verification. It was from Evergreen Bank. My heart steadied as I clicked it open. Dear Miss Hartman, please confirm recent transfer of account ownership to new primary contact. I scrolled to the bottom. The confirmation link glowed blue. Below it, a warning. If this change was unauthorized, please contact your branch representative immediately. I didn't hesitate. I picked up my phone, dialed the number listed, and pressed the speaker icon. After a few rings, a man answered. This is Mark from Evergreen. How can I help? This is Olivia Hartman, I said. I did not authorize any ownership transfer. He paused, typing audibly. All right, Miss Hartman. I see the request here, initiated by Noah and Margaret Hartman. You're listed as the current account administrator. Would you like me to mark this as contested yes? Do that now. Understood. The account will be temporarily frozen while we review. You'll receive confirmation shortly. Thank you, I said, then hung up. Frozen. The word landed heavy and fitting all at once. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Outside, clouds gathered low over the skyline, a dull silver pressing against the glass. My reflection shimmered faintly on the window, steady, unflinching. If they wanted me gone, they were about to find out what gone really meant. I opened my laptop again, added a new folder beside the first one, Proof 2, Intervention. Inside it, I dropped the screenshots, the email confirmation, the bank contact note. each file labeled with the hour, minute, and second. Years of working with numbers had taught me that order was power. Chaos only wins if you don't take notes. By afternoon, the review confirmation came through. Your account has been placed under temporary freeze pending verification. I read it twice, then whispered good. My phone buzzed almost instantly afterward. A text from Ryan. Mom says all her cards are being declined. What did you do? I didn't reply. Another came a few minutes later. Olivia, this isn't funny. People are calling. Still nothing. I set the phone face down. The silence felt heavier now, but not uncomfortable, just deliberate. Then came the voicemail. His voice was clipped, irritated. You can't just freeze accounts that aren't yours. Mom's losing it. Call me back before you make this worse. I pressed play again twice, then saved it. Proof 3, voicemail 1. The next buzz was my mother. I hesitated before hitting play. Olivia. Her voice trembled, just enough to sound sincere. There's a mix-up with the payments. Could you call the bank? You always know how to fix these things. Fix. Always fix. I stared at the wall as her voice faded, then whispered. Not this time. The hours stretched quiet after that. Outside rain returned softer, now tapping against the glass like someone too polite to knock. I poured another cup of coffee, the kind that scalds your tongue before it wakes you up. The apartment smelled of roasted beans and wet air. I sat at the table, letting the rhythm of the rain sync with the steady tick of the wall clock. Every betrayal has a rhythm. You just have to listen long enough to catch it. By evening, my phone was a small battlefield of notifications. Texts, missed calls, emails, each more frantic than the last. One from Madison, my brother's wife. Families need less tension during the holidays. I almost laughed. The sentence was so perfectly rehearsed it could have come straight from my mother's mouth. I screenshotted it, dropped it into Proof 4, messages. Then, just as I was about to close the laptop, a new email appeared. No sender name, just a string of letters. Subject line, you should hear this before they delete it. For a moment I hesitated. It could have been spam, but curiosity pushed past caution. I clicked it open. There was a single attachment, dinner, MP3. I put on my headphones and pressed play. At first there was laughter, the clink of silverware, the hum of background conversation. Then my mother's voice, smooth, measured. She's always been distant, cold, convenient when we need her, but not really family. Laughter followed. Ryan's sharper, Madison's soft and smug. She likes control, Ryan said. This is better. She'll finally learn to let go. My father's voice came next, quiet but clear. Don't stir it up, son. Just let it settle. Madison again, bright and cruel. She should be thankful we're keeping the peace. And finally, my mother's voice, faint but certain, we'll change the accounts tomorrow. The recording ended with the scrape of a chair, the clink of glass against glass, and the echo of their laughter. I sat perfectly still. The apartment seemed to shrink around me, every sound muffled under the weight of that last sentence. We'll change the accounts tomorrow. It was one thing to suspect betrayal. It was another to hear it wrapped in laughter. I replayed the file once, then twice, until I could feel each word etching itself into me. Cold, convenient, not really family. When I finally pulled off the headphones, my hands were steady. I saved the file as Proof 5, recording. Then, I opened a new document titled Statement of Facts. On the first line I wrote, audio recording dated November 20. Participants, Margaret, Richard, Noah, Madison. Subject, justification for exclusion. I paused, then added evidence catalog. Not emotion. Outside, the rain picked up again, tapping harder now. I let the sound fill the room as I stared at the screen. Their words were still echoing in my head, but instead of pain, something else began to settle. Not rage. Not grief. Precision. I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. The proof spoke louder than I ever could. I saved the document, closed my laptop, and sat in the dim light until the last drop of rain slid down the window pane. Then I whispered into the quiet. You wanted peace. You just never asked what it would cost. The morning after the recording, I woke before the Sunday. The apartment was still the kind of quiet that feels intentional. I made coffee on autopilot, the hiss of the machine breaking the silence, and opened my laptop. The file from last night blinked on the screen, Proof 5 recording. I hovered the cursor over it but didn't play it again. I didn't need to. Their voices were already carved into the inside of my skull. My inbox was full. Most were automated responses from the systems I'd contacted yesterday. The mortgage portal, the electric company, the bank. The confirmations came in one by one, polite and clinical. Account suspended pending review. Access locked for security verification. Service temporarily paused. I clicked each message open one after another, saving the PDFs into a new folder titled Proof 6, Execution. The files stacked neatly like a ledger of justice. Around 7, the phone started buzzing again. The first call was from Mom. I let it ring until voicemail, then Dad, then Ryan. By the time I'd finished my coffee, there were 7 missed calls and 2 texts. I ignored all of them. The phone vibrated again, this time with a notification from Evergreen Bank. Subject: action completed. Account frozen. I opened it, reading every word slowly. The message was short. Your account has been placed under review and will remain frozen pending verification by the primary holder. The sentence was clean without apology. I sat back and let it sink in. That was it. The fund was locked, $950,000 inaccessible to anyone. I turned off the coffee machine and looked out the window. The sky was gray, streaked with a thin, cold drizzle. A year ago, I would have been in Seattle by now, arranging flowers and making excuses for why the turkey hadn't thawed in time. This year, I wasn't invited, and for the first time, I felt grateful for that. I went to the kitchen table, pulled my notebook toward me, and flipped to a blank page. At the top, I wrote Operation Silence. Below it, I began listing every system that ran through my hands: mortgage, property tax, utilities, internet, credit line, family savings fund, each one with a small empty box beside it. I took a deep breath and opened the first website. The mortgage portal loaded with a familiar hum. My name, O. Hartman, appeared at the top of the page. I clicked Manage Account. A drop-down appeared, Pause Payment. The system asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to suspend all automatic drafts? Yes, I whispered, though no one was there to hear it. A green checkmark appeared. Request processed. It was so easy, too easy. No fireworks, no alarms, just a quiet shift in power. Next came the electric company. Login, verify, suspend. Gas, water, internet. Each one fell like a domino. I worked slowly, deliberately. With every confirmation screen, I saved a screenshot. Proof 7, Execution Log. When I paused to stretch, my back ached from leaning forward too long. The clock on the wall showed 10. The city outside had brightened, a weak sun struggling through the clouds. I walked to the window, watching light glint off wet pavement. Down on the street, people hurried past, carrying grocery bags and flowers. The world was preparing for celebration. Mine was already underway. The first email confirmation came through at 11. Effective November 27, electric service will be suspended pending payment. The next followed within minutes. Gas service scheduled for disconnection November 28 at 6:00 a.m. Thanksgiving Eve. Perfect. I added the notes to my list, drawing red check marks next to electric and gas. Each one steadied me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about equilibrium. While waiting for the next email, I found myself thinking back to last spring. Ryan had bragged over dinner about how the bills basically pay themselves. Mom had laughed, her hand resting on his arm. Olivia's systems are such a blessing, she said. It's like the house runs on autopilot. They never realized autopilot had a pilot. I smiled faintly, not with bitterness, but with understanding. They called me cold for years. Maybe they were right. Cold is reliable. Cold gets things done. By noon, my list was nearly complete. Every account either suspended, reviewed, or flagged. I highlighted the last one, Family Fund. The balance still glowed across the screen, $950,000, calm as still water. My cursor hovered over the suspend access button. The system asked one final time, "Are you sure you want to freeze this account?" "Yes," I said again. The confirmation blinked. Account frozen. For a long moment, I just sat there listening to the quiet. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was clean, sharp, almost peaceful. I saved the confirmation page and dropped it into the Proof 6 folder. My desktop was a mosaic of evidence, every file named and dated, every timestamp, a reminder of how easily power can shift when you know where the wires run. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Evergreen Bank. "Please note, all related debit cards will be temporarily deactivated within 48 hours. I set the phone down and smiled. Perfect timing. They'd start noticing soon. Maybe when they went to buy groceries. Maybe when they tried to pay the caterer. Maybe when the house went dark. I poured another cup of coffee, now lukewarm, and sipped it slowly. The bitterness didn't bother me. It tasted honest. At 2:30, another sound broke the calm, a soft ping from my computer. Another confirmation. Autopay canceled. Hartman household mortgage. I leaned back in my chair. The email light reflected off the window pane, framing my reflection against the gray sky. My face looked calm, almost unfamiliar. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just steady. I turned off the laptop and sat in the quiet. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping gently against the glass. I closed my eyes and listened to it. Each drop sounded like punctuation, a rhythm that only I understood. When the phone buzzed again, I didn't even check who it was. The vibration rolled across the table, echoing in the silence. Somewhere in Seattle, someone was realizing the lights had gone out. I walked to the window and watched the city blur beneath the falling rain. My reflection in the glass looked almost translucent now, as if I were dissolving into the storm itself. "They wanted peace," I murmured, my voice low and even. "Let's see how peaceful a dark house feels." The clock ticked once, then again. The sound was small but final. I blew out the candle on the counter, the thin smoke curling upward, vanishing into the dim kitchen air. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, their glow bending through the drizzle. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one keeping things running. I wasn't the fix. I wasn't the quiet hand behind their comfort. I was the silence itself, and it felt like power. 2 days passed before the silence cracked. It started small, a vibration against the countertop, a sound so ordinary I almost ignored it. My phone lit up the screen, flashing with Noah's name. I didn't move. The vibration stopped, then started again, until it became a steady hum against the wood. I turned it over. "We need to talk. Something's wrong with the bank." Then another message. "Mom says all her cards are getting declined." "What did you do?" I stared at the text, the words blurring under the screen's glow. For a moment, I imagined their faces, the confusion, the rising panic, the denial that it could ever be their fault. I didn't reply. Instead, I took a screenshot, saved it to a new folder, Proof 7, Reactions. The sound of the capture clicked sharp in the quiet. Minutes later, another message appeared. This one from Mom. "Olivia, please fix whatever you did. People are calling about bills. I don't know what's happening." The wording made me pause. "Fix whatever you did. Not can you help, not. We're confused." Always a demand wrapped in concern. I poured coffee and watched steam fog the glass of my window. Outside, the city was silver, with morning light, a soft mist rising from the wet streets. When the voicemail notification blinked, I pressed play. Her voice was trembling but controlled the way it always was when she wanted something. Olivia, honey, there's a mix-up with the payments. We can't reach the utility company and your father's card isn't working. Could you please call them? You always know how to handle this. I let it play to the end, then saved it. Proof 7. Voicemail 1. Then Ryan again, his voice sharp with panic. You've gone too far. You can't just freeze accounts that aren't yours. Mom's losing it. Call me before you make this worse. I smiled faintly. Accounts that aren't mine. Every one of them had my name printed at the top. I didn't reply. I didn't even turn off the notifications. I let the phone keep buzzing the sound like a dull metronome while I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, black coffee. The ordinary mixed with the extraordinary. By afternoon, the messages had become a storm. Texts, emails, voicemails. The subject lines escalated. Urgent, please answer, this isn't funny. I ignored them all. At 3 p.m., an email caught my eye. No sender name. Just the subject, you might want to hear this. My thumb hesitated before tapping it open. Another file attachment. This time labeled Dinner 2, MP3. I put on my headphones, half expecting static. Instead, laughter filled my ears. Then my mother's voice again. She'll come crawling back, she said. She always does. Ryan's voice followed, low and irritated. Not this time. She's embarrassing herself. She's emotional, Madison chimed in. She wants attention. My father sighed. She wants control. Then the scrape of a fork. Let her keep her silence, Mom said finally. It's easier that way. The file cut off. I sat very still, listening to the hum of the fridge, the faint tapping of rain against the glass. They didn't know they were writing their own obituary in my inbox. I saved the file as proof 8. Recording 2. Evening fell early. I lit a candle on the counter, the small flame steady and gold. I didn't feel angry anymore. The anger had burned out days ago, leaving something clearer, heavier, like cooled metal. Every file, every message, every voicemail, they were the final proof of what I'd always known. It wasn't love they wanted. It was obedience. At 5:47 p.m., the phone rang again. This time I picked up. Olivia. My mother's voice cracked mid-syllable. Please, we can't pay for anything. The house is cold. The lights. Then light a candle, I said softly. There was silence. Then you can't do this to family. You already did, I answered. You just didn't think I'd notice. I hung up. My hands didn't shake. For a long time I stood in the kitchen staring at the reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me was calm, older somehow. My mother had called me cold so many times it had stopped being an insult. Cold was steady. Cold didn't break. The rain outside turned into a drizzle, each drop catching the streetlights in thin silver streaks. I sat down at my desk and opened the folder labeled Operation Silence. Every line had a check mark beside it now. Mortgage suspended. Utilities paused. Gas, water, electric pending disconnection. Family fund frozen. I added one more line at the bottom, power out. Then, out of habit, I opened the live camera feed I'd once set up for the Seattle property. It had been meant for home maintenance monitoring, but they'd never bothered to change the login. The feed loaded slowly, the pictures slightly grainy, but I could still make out the outline of the house through the drizzle. The windows were dark. The porch light flickered once, then went black. I watched it for a long time, not gloating, just witnessing. Proof 9. Visual. At 6:02 a text came through. You win. Are you happy now? I took a screenshot and labeled it Proof 10. Surrender. Happiness wasn't the right word. It wasn't joy or satisfaction or triumph. It was relief, the way your chest loosens after holding your breath for too long. I set the phone aside and watched the candle flame dance, the small light steady in the dark. Outside sirens wailed, faintly distant and impersonal. Life went on. I poured a glass of wine, walked to the window and leaned against the frame. The street below shimmered under the lamplight. In an apartment across the way, a family sat at their table heads, bowed in laughter. The sound carried faintly through the glass, and for a moment, I envied the simplicity of it. Then I realized it wasn't envy. It was acceptance. Some families are born, some are built, some are buried. When the candle burned low, I blew it out and whispered into the smoke, "You wanted calm. Here it is." The next morning, the city woke to bright winter light. My phone was heavy with new messages, but I didn't look. I brewed coffee and opened the window. The air smelled like salt and rain, clean and new. I picked up my pen and wrote in my notebook, Phase 1, complete. Below it, a single line, "They mistook silence for weakness." It was the warning before the storm. Then I closed the book, placed it beside my coffee, and sat in the sunlight until it warmed my hands. The knock came just after 9 that night. I wasn't expecting anyone. The city outside was quiet, the kind of silence that feels earned after days of rain. When I opened the door, Henry Bloom stood there, holding a bottle of wine, and wearing that same hesitant half-smile I hadn't seen in 2 years. "I heard you're throwing some sort of dinner," he said. I blinked at him, still holding the edge of the door. "News travels fast. Your brother called me," he replied. "Accidentally, I think. He was yelling about bank accounts. I figured I should check if you're alive." "I'm better than alive," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, looking around the apartment like it might break under the weight of whatever silence lived here. He'd always been careful, even back when we worked together. Steady voice, calm eyes, the kind of man who never needed to raise his tone to be heard. He placed the bottle on the counter. "Still drinking Cabernet. Still works." I poured 2 glasses, handed him one, and watched his expression as he took in the open laptop, the folders on the screen, the stack of notes. "You've been busy," he said softly. "Cleaning house," I replied. Henry sipped his wine, his gaze meeting mine over the rim of the glass. "You always did have a talent for organization. Didn't think you'd weaponize it." I smiled faintly. Desperation turns order into strategy. We stood there for a moment, the hum of the fridge filling the pause. He finally asked, "What happened?" "They cut me out," I said. "Not just from Thanksgiving. From everything. Bank accounts, shared files, even group chats. They erased me like a typo." Henry's jaw tightened. "And you erased them back." "Something like that." I took another sip, the wine sharp and warm in my throat. They wanted peace without me. I gave them silence instead. He studied me for a long moment before setting his glass down. "So what now? What's the endgame?" "There isn't one," I said simply. "Just balance." Henry nodded, though, his eyes softened. "You always did mistake fairness for closure." I looked at him, almost smiling. "And you always mistook kindness for weakness." He laughed, quietly shaking his head. "Touché." We talked for a while about everything but the family. The world beyond revenge still existed, projects, mutual friends, the sound of the rain easing off. When he left, he paused at the door. "If you ever want to stop fighting ghosts, you know where to find me." "I'm not fighting them," I said. "I'm just turning the lights off." He hesitated, then nodded. "Good night, Olivia." After he left, I sat on the couch and let the quiet return. The apartment felt lighter, somehow like the storm outside had carried away some invisible weight. On the coffee table, my phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Around midnight, I opened my notebook. Phase 2, Reflection. Beneath it, I wrote, "Take inventory. What still belongs to me." I started listing the beach house in Malibu, mine, outright purchased with my own earnings, long before the family fund existed. My freelance work. My peace. The last word felt strange on the page, foreign but possible. The next morning I woke to sunlight spilling across the floor. The rain had finally stopped. The air was clear, the streets shining with the kind of brightness that only comes after a storm. I brewed coffee and checked my inbox out of habit. The top email stopped me cold. From Evergreen Bank. Subject: temporary freeze confirmation. Family fund. I clicked it open. The message was polite, almost cheerful. "Your request has been processed. All associated accounts are now under review. Please allow up to 10 business days for reactivation, pending owner verification." 10 business days. Thanksgiving was in 3. I smiled, closed the laptop, and wrote another line in my notebook: let consequences arrive on schedule. By noon, Rosa Delgado called. She was my former housekeeper back when I still split time between Portland and Malibu. "Señorita Olivia," she said, breathless, "I got your message about the event. Is it true? You're hosting again." I hesitated, caught off guard. "Hosting the dinner at the beach house," she said. "You said last year maybe, but now you want a real feast, 40 guests, a live band." It took me a second to remember. Months ago, in a moment of drunken defiance, I'd joked with her about throwing my own Thanksgiving someday, one that didn't require an invitation. She must have taken me seriously. "Rosa," I said slowly, "how far have you planned?" "Oh, everything. I hired the same caterer from the governor's gala. The floral designer is on standby. We only need your approval." I could hear the ocean in the background, the faint crash of waves through the phone line. The image formed instantly in my head: glass walls, candlelight, people laughing, a table full of faces that chose to be there. A different kind of Thanksgiving. "Do it," I said. Rosa paused. "You're sure?" "Completely." After the call ended, I stood by the window watching sunlight bounce off puddles on the street. For years I had chased inclusion, begging for a seat at their table. Now I'd build one of my own, bigger, brighter, and this time everyone who ever made me feel like family would have a place. That night I pulled up the folder labeled Operation Silence and stared at the neat list of completed actions. Every box checked, every account suspended. The work was done. I closed the folder, opened a new document, and typed the title, Thanksgiving Guest List. The first few names came easily: Rosa and her son Mateo. Evelyn from my old job, Mr. Collins, my mentor who'd retired last year, the neighbors who had once helped me fix a flat tire, Henry. Then more came, names of people who had made me feel seen when my own family didn't. By the time I finished, the list had grown to 40. Outside, the sky was streaked pink and gold. The sound of waves carried faintly through the open window. I looked at the list again and whispered, "For once they don't get to decide who belongs." I sent the invitations that night. Each one carried the same message: you are invited to Thanksgiving dinner at the Glass Shore, Malibu. Dress for warmth, not formality. Come hungry. Come as you are. When the last email was sent, I sat back in my chair and exhaled. The cursor blinked at the bottom of the screen like a heartbeat. Across the room, my phone buzzed one more time. A voicemail from Mom. I didn't listen. Not yet. I turned off the lights, leaving the apartment in soft shadow, and walked to the window. The city glowed below me, steady, alive, indifferent. Somewhere, 200 miles north, a house sat in darkness. Its lights cut off its silence, finally louder than mine. The reflection in the glass showed a woman I barely recognized. Her posture was straight, her eyes calm, her expression unreadable. I smiled faintly. "Thanksgiving's coming," I whispered. "This year, I'm not bringing pie. I'm bringing peace." The night air carried the words back to me, softer, almost approving. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like a beginning. The sun rose warm over Malibu, the first truly golden morning of the season. Light spilled through the wide glass walls of the house, sliding across polished floors and catching the faint sparkle of the ocean beyond. I stood barefoot on the terrace with a mug of coffee in my hands, the salt air clinging to my skin, the world below shimmering with quiet promise. For the first time in years, Thanksgiving didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like a choice. The crew had arrived before dawn. From the kitchen came the faint rhythm of clattering pans, laughter, in Spanish, Rosa's voice directing the caterers with the precision of a conductor. Down in the garden, workers hung strands of string lights through the olive trees, each bulb glowing faintly in the morning haze. The scent of rosemary and lemon drifted up from the kitchen, mingling with the brine of the sea. I set my mug down and leaned on the railing, watching the light slide over the waves. The tide was calm, the water turning from steel blue to silver. A year ago, I would have been driving through Seattle traffic with pies on the passenger seat, cursing red lights, pretending I was wanted. Now my only task was to breathe. Rosa appeared at the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. "Señorita Olivia, the florist has arrived. He's asking about the table length." 30 feet, I said. "White linen." "Keep it simple," she smiled. "Simple for some people means a bowl of mashed potatoes. For you, it's a chandelier of candles." I laughed softly. "I've earned my candles." As she disappeared back inside, I caught my reflection in the glass hair, tied loosely, no makeup, eyes steady. I looked more like myself than I had in years. Not the accountant daughter, not the problem solver, not the quiet keeper of the peace. Just a woman standing in her own light. By noon, the preparations were in full swing. Evelyn arrived first, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing an oversized sun hat that looked ridiculous and perfect all at once. "You weren't kidding when you said beach casual," she said, stepping onto the terrace. "You're hosting the kind of Thanksgiving people make movies about. Only if the soundtrack is jazz and revenge," I said. She grinned. "Now that's a genre I'd watch." We laughed, and for a moment it felt like nothing had ever gone wrong. Rosa joined us with a tray of tiny pastries, Matteo trailing behind her in a crisp white shirt. He was taller than I remembered, his shy smile now confident. "He's in culinary school now," Rosa said proudly. "Second in his class." I looked at him. "That's amazing, Matteo. You're going to put me out of business one day." He blushed, shaking his head. "You built all this. I just want to learn." Rosa squeezed my arm gently. "You gave us a chance, Olivia. That's better than any meal." Her words settled in my chest, like warmth spreading from the inside out. For years I'd been the one giving without acknowledgement. Now I was surrounded by people who understood gratitude without having to be asked for it. By afternoon, the sky had turned a perfect endless blue. The long table stretched across the patio, covered in crisp white linen vases of olive branches and candles waiting for dusk. Musicians arrived, setting up under the pergola, with instruments that gleamed like honey in the Sunday. I wandered through it all, adjusting details, flowers a little to the left, plates perfectly aligned. Every movement felt meditative. I was building something my family could never touch. Meanwhile, 200 miles north, Seattle was preparing too. At that exact hour, Mom would be checking the oven, her hands trembling as she pretended control. Dad would be pacing, muttering about the power company, Ryan snapping at the caterer, Madison smoothing her skirt like an apology she'd never give. They'd call it tradition. I'd call it theater. The phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it right away. When I finally did, it was a text from Dad. "Your mother isn't well. Maybe you could call her." I read it twice, then locked the screen. I wasn't going to play savior again. Not this time. By 4, the guests began to arrive. Laughter echoed through the courtyard as cars pulled up the drive, people spilling out with bottles of wine, dishes wrapped in foil, hugs that felt real. The long white table gleamed under the fading light, each place set with care. As the sun dipped lower, the sea caught fire in shades of gold and rose. Henry arrived just as Rosa was lighting the candles. He carried a basket of fresh bread and 2 bottles of wine. "I heard this might be the social event of the season," he said with that crooked grin. "Only if you help me slice the turkey," I said. He held up his hands. "Deal. But if you start an empire of catered revenge dinners, I want stock options." The music began softly. Jazz guitar, gentle percussion. Conversations flowed easily, the sound blending with the sea breeze. When I looked around, it struck me how every person there represented a piece of my life I had chosen. None of them shared my blood, yet the warmth was thicker than anything I'd ever felt at that Seattle table. I raised my glass. "To second chances," I said, "and to peace, the kind you don't have to beg for." Glasses clinked, laughter rippled through the air. Rosa's eyes shimmered as she lifted her glass. "To peace," she echoed. As everyone began eating, I slipped away for a moment, walking down to the edge of the terrace where the ocean met the light. The horizon was a straight line of fire. I took a deep breath, letting the salt air fill my lungs. For years I'd thought revenge would feel loud, dramatic, cinematic. But standing there surrounded by laughter that didn't depend on performance, I realized it felt quiet, clean, like justice exhaled. My phone buzzed again. This time I glanced at it. A new text from Ryan. "Please, Olivia. Mom's sick. She just wanted peace." I stared at the message, the glow of the screen soft against the darkening sky. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type. I saved the message and added it to my evidence folder. Proof 11. Regret. I whispered to no one. They always confuse regret with apology. When I turned back toward the house, the first stars had appeared above the ocean. The lights from the patio flickered softly, laughter rolling through the night like a tide. Rosa waved from the table, beckoning me back. I walked up the steps and rejoined them, taking my seat between Evelyn and Henry. As I sat, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest scent of salt and rosemary. Henry leaned close, his voice low. "You look different tonight." "How so, lighter?" he said. "Like someone finally let go." I smiled. "Maybe I did." We ate until the plates were empty and the candles burned low. The sea shimmered black and silver beyond the glass walls, and the music softened to a hum. I looked around the table at faces illuminated by candlelight, people who didn't need me to fix them, people who were simply glad I existed. When the last toast was raised, I glanced toward the horizon one more time. The ocean reflected the stars like scattered promises. Tomorrow they would eat in darkness. I would dine under the stars. And for the first time in my life, that felt exactly right. The first call came just as Rosa was serving dessert. The sound of the phone buzzing across the counter was sharp against the background hum of laughter and soft music. I ignored it. The guests were still gathered around the long table, their faces glowing under candlelight, forks clinking against plates of pumpkin tart and spiced pear cake. The smell of cinnamon butter and sea salt filled the air. Then the phone buzzed again. And again. Henry glanced over, raising an eyebrow. "You expecting someone?" "No one who matters," I said, pushing the phone farther away. The guitar player switched to something slower, mellow, and warm. I looked around the table, 40 people who had chosen to be there, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Evelyn was laughing at something, Rosa said, her head thrown back, the sound clear and alive. Mateo had pulled out his phone to show photos of his new culinary creations, and even Henry, usually reserved, was smiling like he belonged here. It was everything my family's dinners never were. Then the phone started ringing, this time with a different tone. I caught the caller ID before the screen dimmed. Mom. For a second, I just stared at her name glowing in white letters. It looked unfamiliar, like a label on a box I hadn't opened in years. I let it ring until the sound cut off on its own. Rosa noticed my silence. "Everything okay?" I nodded, though my stomach felt tight. "Just ghosts knocking on the wrong door." She smiled softly. "Then don't answer." I didn't. But when the phone started again 5 minutes later, this time with a flood of notifications, I excused myself and stepped inside. The glass door clicked shut behind me, muting the sound of music and laughter. The kitchen was quiet, empty, except for the low flicker of candlelight. I picked up the phone. The screen was a storm of messages. From Mom: "Olivia, please, the house is dark. None of the cards are working. The oven shut off mid-dinner." From Ryan: "You need to fix this now. We have 30 guests here and nothing's working." From Dad: "The bank says you froze everything. Do you understand what you've done?" Each text came faster than the last, the tone unraveling from control to panic. I could almost see it, the dining room where I'd spent so many years, standing at the edge, unseen. The perfect table settings, the matching napkins, the smug smiles that hid cold judgment. Now all of it was unraveling. The lights gone, the food ruined, the guests confused. And me, 200 miles away, surrounded by people who had built their own warmth. Another text arrived, this one from Madison. "This isn't you. Please stop before it's too late." I exhaled slowly and set the phone down. "It's already too late," I whispered. Outside, the laughter continued. The sound of clinking glasses drifted through the open doorway. I walked to the window and looked out. The sea was silver under the moonlight waves, gliding toward shore with a calm inevitability. There was a beauty in that, how water could erase footprints without ever raising its voice. When I turned back to the table, I saw Henry standing by the door watching me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just studied my face. "Family?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "They're having complications." He stepped closer. "And you're not going to help them, no?" I looked past him out at the guests still laughing in the glow of the candles. "For once I'm not going to fix it." Henry's gaze softened. "You know you don't look angry anymore." "I'm not," I said. "I'm just done." He nodded, then gently took the phone from the counter and placed it face down. Then let it go. When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted to travel stories. Rosa was telling a tale about her first year in California, and everyone was laughing again. I sat down, the sound washing over me like waves. The food was warm, the wine richer than I remembered. Every face around me was touched by firelight, every voice threaded with real joy. I lifted my glass and took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through me. Then, from somewhere deep in the pocket of my dress, came one more vibration. I almost ignored it, but something instinct maybe made me check. It was a voicemail, no caller ID. I put the phone to my ear and pressed play. Static at first. Then, my mother's voice. "Olivia, I don't know if you can hear me. Everything's gone wrong. The lights, the food, the guests, they're leaving. Ryan's furious. Your father won't speak. I just wanted peace. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please just—" Her voice cracked, fading beneath the sound of someone yelling in the background. Then silence. I listened to it twice. Then saved it. Proof 12. Consequence. When I returned outside, Rosa was handing out blankets as the night cooled. The candles flickered in the soft ocean wind, their flames steady despite the breeze. Henry caught my eye from across the table and raised his glass. I raised mine back wordlessly. For a while we just sat there under the stars, the sound of waves blending with laughter and jazz. The world felt impossibly wide and mercifully still. Around midnight, when the guests began to leave, they hugged me like an old friend. Evelyn kissed my cheek and whispered, "You've built something beautiful here, Liv. Don't ever give it back." Rosa stayed behind to help clear the table, humming softly as she stacked plates. I joined her, working quietly, the rhythm of small tasks grounding me. When we finished, she stood at the doorway, looking out toward the dark horizon. "You did it," she said simply. I followed her gaze to the endless stretch of sea. Did what turned pain into something good. The words settled over me like a blessing. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. After she left, I walked barefoot down to the edge of the sand. The ocean shimmered under the moonlight, silver and endless. I stood there for a long time, the water licking at my toes, the wind tugging at my hair. Behind me, the house glowed like a lantern, warm, alive mine. I thought about Seattle, about their dark dining room, the cold silence where laughter should have been. I thought about my mother's trembling voice, the one she used when the control slipped through her fingers. And I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn love from people who only wanted loyalty. The tide crept higher, washing over my feet. I whispered into the night, "You wanted peace. Now you have silence." The waves answered steady and unbothered. When I finally turned back toward the house, the candles inside had burned low, their glow soft and golden. I closed the doors, shutting out the wind, and stood in the stillness. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from Ryan. "Everyone's gone. Mom's crying. You win." I saved it without reading the rest. Proof 13. Aftermath. Then I set the phone on the counter, turned off the last of the lights, and walked out to the balcony. The night smelled like salt and freedom. In the distance, lightning flickered faintly over the ocean, a storm moving north, toward Seattle. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, smiled, and whispered, "Let it rain." The morning after the dinner was unnervingly still. The Pacific stretched out like glass soft silver under a cloudless sky. I woke later than usual, the smell of burnt-out candles still lingering faintly in the air. My head felt light, not from the wine but from the quiet. It was the first Thanksgiving morning in years where my stomach didn't twist from expectation. I made coffee barefoot in the sunlight, spilling through the kitchen windows. The long table outside was still half-set wine glasses, catching the early light petals scattered from the centerpiece's napkins, fluttering gently in the sea breeze. It looked like the aftermath of something joyful, proof that warmth could exist without pretense. As I took my first sip, my phone buzzed against the counter. I almost didn't look, but curiosity, that small, unkillable thing, won. Breaking news: Mitchell family charity under investigation. The headline blinked up from a news alert, simple and sharp. I froze, then clicked. The article loaded slowly, the words appearing line by line, as if building their own rhythm. Elaine Mitchell, head of the North Sound Community Fund, has stepped down amid allegations of financial mismanagement and misuse of shared accounts. Sources indicate irregularities linked to a multi-account family trust spanning several years. There was a photo beneath it, Mom, in her immaculate blazer, looking smaller than usual, her smile strained and artificial. Behind her stood Ryan, his expression tight. The caption read, "Family declines comment." I read it twice. The coffee went cold in my hands. Then I started laughing. It wasn't mean or manic. It was disbelief, the kind that bursts when the world finally catches up to your truth. For years they'd lived like their goodness was fact, not performance. My mother, the saint of charity luncheons. My brother, the devoted husband with the perfect suburban home. Every time I'd tried to speak up, I'd been the problem, the overthinker, the dramatic one. Now there it was, front-page justice written in black and white. The phone buzzed again, this time with texts. From Evelyn Liv, "You're all over the news. Are you okay?" From Rosa, "Dios mío. It's everywhere. People are saying, your mother." From Henry, "You knew this was coming, didn't you?" I typed a single reply to all three. I didn't start it, I just stopped covering it. Then I turned the phone face down and let silence fill the room again. By noon, more articles had surfaced. Charity board launches internal audit. Mitchell family faces financial fallout. Sources cite frozen accounts and missing funds. Each headline stacked like a domino, one tipping the next. Somewhere in Seattle, Mom would be pacing in her perfect kitchen, the same one I'd helped pay for. Dad would be on the phone with lawyers, Ryan blaming everyone but himself. I could picture it, the denial, the anger, the panic. I didn't feel triumph, just release. Around 2, I stepped outside. The sun was higher now, the waves rhythmic and calm. Rosa and Mateo had come early to help clean up their laughter, carrying across the terrace as they stacked chairs. "You should read what they're saying online," Rosa said, shaking her head. "Half the city is gossiping, the other half is cheering." "I'm not reading comments," I said, taking a deep breath of salt air. "Comments are just noise." She nodded knowingly. "Noise can't hurt you if you stop listening." By late afternoon, another alert arrived. This one wasn't from the news. It was an email from Rachel Carter, Seattle Ledger. Subject: request for statement, family trust audit. My heart thudded once, then steadied. Rachel had been the journalist who'd worked with me years ago on a non-profit audit, sharp, fair, and unflinching. I opened the message. "Hi, Olivia. We've obtained confirmation that you are the listed account holder for the Mitchell Family Fund. Would you like to comment on your role before publication?" The cursor blinked at the end of her question, patient and polite. For a long moment I didn't type anything. Then finally I wrote, "No comment. Just accuracy." I hit send, closed the laptop, and poured another coffee. The taste was bitter grounding. By evening, the headline had changed again. Audit confirms Olivia Mitchell as primary holder. The accompanying article was cleaner, calmer, less sensational. It laid out facts, years of deposits, my transfers, the records that matched every screenshot and document I had archived. It didn't accuse. It clarified. The internet did the rest. Comments flooded in lines that blurred between sympathy and outrage. Sometimes silence is the only justice left. She didn't ruin them. She revealed them. Family doesn't mean servitude. I sat on the edge of the terrace, scrolling through them in quiet disbelief. It wasn't validation I felt. It was recognition, the soft, dangerous power of being seen. The sky turned violet as the sun slipped into the horizon. The ocean mirrored the colors like glass. I watched until the last streak of light faded and the first stars blinked through. Then the phone rang again. Dad. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me needed to hear it to close the circle. I answered. Olivia, his voice came brittle and thin. You've made your point. This isn't a point, I said quietly. It's a truth. You humiliated your mother. She's in the hospital. I felt my stomach tighten. Is she hurt? She fainted after the reporters showed up. Happy now, my jaw locked. Was she happy when she locked me out of the accounts? When she told me I wasn't family, he went silent for a beat. Then in a low voice he said, You always had to make everything about you. There it was, the old script, polished by years of use. I let it hang in the air before replying. You're right, I said. This part is about me. Finally, I hung up. The waves roared louder outside, wind sweeping across the terrace. I stood by the window staring out at the dark water and whispered to no one. Some people only understand boundaries when they hit the wall. The rest of the night passed in quiet. I lit a single candle and sat at the dining table, the remnants of yesterday's feast spread before me, crumbs, wilted flowers, half-empty glasses. I wasn't celebrating. I was acknowledging. When I checked my inbox one last time before bed, there was a new message waiting. From Rachel Carter, subject follow-up. The board confirmed everything. You won't be named as a whistleblower, but people are going to ask questions. Do you want me to include your quote? I typed back, no need. The proof speaks for itself. Her reply came almost instantly. Sometimes proof is the loudest voice in the room. I stared at that sentence for a long time before closing the laptop. Outside, the ocean hissed against the rocks, steady and endless. Before heading to bed, I wrote one final line in my journal. They built comfort on my silence. I built peace on theirs. Then I blew out the candle, leaving the room in darkness, except for the faint reflection of the moon on the sea. It wasn't victory, it was equilibrium. And it was enough. 3 days after the headlines broke, a soft rain moved down the coast, thin as mist but relentless. I woke to the sound of waves colliding with stone and the faint patter of drops against the balcony glass. The beach below looked washed clean, the footprints from the night of the dinner already gone. It felt like the world was erasing traces of what had been, just as I had. My phone, face down on the counter, blinked with new notifications. I didn't rush to read them. Coffee first. Always coffee. The warmth steadied my hands, the aroma curling up like comfort itself. When I finally checked, there were 3 new voicemails and a dozen texts. The first was from Evelyn. They're on every channel, live. Local, national, even online commentary. People are calling it the Mitchell freeze. You've become a cautionary tale and a hero. The second was from Henry. I know you said you didn't want to talk about it, but the city's watching. Just don't disappear again. Okay. The third was from an unknown number. You don't know me, but thank you. What you did gave the rest of us courage to stand up to our own families. I set the phone down, exhaling slowly. The air felt heavier today, not with guilt, but with aftermath. The kind that comes when the storm's eye has passed, and you realize nothing will ever look quite the same again. By mid-morning, the rain had thickened. The sea blurred into the horizon, gray on gray. Rosa arrived, late hair, damp from the drive, cheeks flushed pink. "Señorita Olivia," she said, stepping inside and shaking off her umbrella, "your name is everywhere. Everyone at the market is talking. They say you exposed corruption." "I didn't expose anything," I said softly. "I just stopped hiding it." She smiled in that quiet way she did when she understood more than she said. Sometimes the truth needs someone brave enough to let it breathe. We spent the morning tidying the house, the aftermath of celebration. Wax dripped down the candle holders, linen napkins, folded neatly, the long table finally cleared. By noon, the clouds broke enough for light to filter in, thin and silvery. When Rosa left, I found myself standing by the window again, staring at the line where ocean met sky. The calm was deceptive, the silence almost too still. Then the phone rang. "Dad." I didn't answer at first. The call stopped, then started again. Relentless. Finally I picked up. "Olivia," he said, voice frayed at the edges. "Your mother's condition, it's not good. She's not speaking to anyone. She wasn't speaking to me long before now," I replied. "This isn't the time for bitterness," he snapped. "She's sick and you—" "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't turn this into another guilt story. You all chose the script. I just stopped performing in it." He exhaled hard. "Reporters are everywhere. They want statements, documents, timelines. Your mother can't handle it. That's not my problem anymore." "You think this is justice?" "Watching your family crumble," I paused, letting the silence stretch until his breathing filled the line. "No," I said finally. "Justice isn't about watching anyone fall. It's about no longer letting them stand on your back." He said nothing. Just a long, shaky breath before the line went dead. I stood there for a while, the phone still pressed to my ear, the rain softening outside. It was strange how quiet victory sounded. That afternoon I drove into town for the first time in weeks. Malibu was slick with rain, the hills a deep emerald. At a small cafe near the pier, I sat by the window with a bowl of soup and watched the ocean churn. Conversations around me hummed softly, the normal kind, weather, traffic, weekend plans. Nobody knew me here, and that anonymity felt like peace. Halfway through lunch, my phone buzzed again. This time, an email from Rachel Carter. "The audit results are official. The board has cleared you of any wrongdoing. They're recommending your documentation as an example of financial transparency. If you'd like to comment for a follow-up story, I can protect your anonymity." I stared at the words for a long time. An example of transparency. The same woman they once called controlling was now being called meticulous. The irony wasn't lost on me. I typed back, "No need for anonymity. Just tell the truth." When I got home, the sky was finally clearing. The last of the rain glittered on the terrace railings like beads of glass. The house smelled faintly of salt and candle wax, the kind of scent that clings to good memories. I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The top article on the Seattle Ledger read, "Elaine Mitchell steps down permanently. Internal review confirms fund mismanagement." The tone was factual, not cruel. The world had moved on to its next story already, but I hadn't. That evening, as twilight turned the ocean violet, I opened my notebook, the same one that had started as Operation Silence. Now it was half filled with evidence, half with reflection. I turned to a blank page and wrote, "Silence can destroy, but it can also protect. The difference is intention." Below it, another line, "They thought I wanted revenge. I only wanted release." I sat there for a while, letting the sound of the waves punctuate each word. Then, out of nowhere, another notification blinked on my screen. A message from Madison. "You don't know what you've done. Mom can't sleep. Ryan's job is gone. You should have let it go." I reread it twice before replying. Maybe I should have, but so should you years ago when I begged you to treat me like family. I hit send, closed the laptop, and walked out to the deck. The sun was gone, leaving a thin gold line on the water's edge. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and breathed in the damp, clean air. The world below was quiet except for the surf. After a while, I went back inside, turned on the record player, and let the soft hum of Billie Holiday fill the room. The melody wove through the air, gentle but haunting. I closed my eyes and let it settle in my chest. When the last song faded, I poured another glass of wine and checked my phone one last time. A new message waited, this one from Rachel again. Your story is changing how people think about family finance. I've had 3 women reach out to me saying they're taking back control of accounts they were excluded from. You started something, Olivia? I stared at that line. You started something. For a long moment, I didn't know how to feel. Then slowly, a small smile spread across my face. Outside, the moon rose pale and perfect over the water, its reflection rippling across the waves. I whispered to the quiet, "Maybe for once that's enough." Then I turned off the lights, left the sliding doors open to the sound of the ocean, and let the night air carry away the last of what still felt heavy. The world didn't end in flames. It ended in calm. And that, I realized, was its own kind of revolution. A week passed before I saw my father again. The rain had cleared, leaving the coast sharp and bright, the kind of winter light that made everything look too honest. I was out on the balcony watering the plants when the intercom buzzed. A man's voice crackled through the speaker. "Delivery for Miss Mitchell." I hadn't ordered anything. Still, I went downstairs, pulling a sweater around me. At the gate stood a courier holding a small wooden box tied with twine. The sender's name made me pause. Robert Mitchell. My father. I signed for it, hands steady, despite the sudden rush of memory. The box was light, the wood smooth beneath my fingers. I carried it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it for a long minute before untying the twine. Inside lay a folded letter, and something wrapped in linen. I unfolded the letter first. My father's handwriting, the same neat, deliberate script I'd seen on every check and birthday card growing up. "Olivia, your mother isn't well. She's quiet now, maybe too quiet. I won't ask you to come, but she keeps your picture on her desk again. The house feels empty without her voice. Maybe it always did and I just never noticed. I can't fix what we did. You were right to walk away. I just hope someday you'll remember that once before all of this we were a family trying to do our best even when we failed at it. Love, Dad." The words were simple, unpolished, and for that reason they hurt. I unfolded the linen. Inside was a necklace, a thin chain of silver, with a small pendant shaped like a seashell. I remembered it instantly. My mother's worn every summer we spent in Oregon when things between us were still easy. Before money and silence replaced love. I held it in my palm, cold at first, then warming slowly against my skin. I didn't cry. I just stood there, letting the weight of it settle, not heavy, not light, just real. By afternoon, the mail brought another envelope, this one, from Rachel Carter. Inside was a printed copy of the final article. It was clean, factual, and fair. It told the story of the Mitchell Fund, not as scandal, but as truth uncovered. At the bottom, one quote stood alone: "Peace isn't silence. It's when the truth stops echoing." I didn't remember saying it, but it sounded like something I would. That evening, Henry came by. He didn't call first, just showed up at the door, holding a bag of groceries and a bottle of wine. "You look like someone who hasn't eaten all day," he said. I stepped aside to let him in. "You brought food, not questions. That's already my favorite thing about you," he smiled faintly. "I figured you've had enough of both." He cooked while I sat at the counter watching him move through my kitchen like he'd been there 100 times. The smell of garlic and rosemary filled the air, grounding and warm. When we finally sat down, neither of us said much. The quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned. After dinner, he reached across the table and tapped the folded letter beside me. "From your dad," I nodded. "He says Mom keeps my photo on her desk." "That's something. It's too late for something," I said softly. He looked at me for a long moment. Maybe not for forgiveness, Doesn't have to mean reunion. Sometimes it just means you stop letting the pain rent space in your head. I smiled faintly. You sound like my therapist, he chuckled. I sound like a man who spent too many years learning that peace and pride can't share a room. I turned the seashell pendant over in my hand. I don't know what forgiveness is supposed to look like anymore. Maybe it's not supposed to look like anything he said. Maybe it's just being able to say their names without flinching. We sat in silence after that, the sound of the ocean seeping through the open door. When he left later that night, I stood by the window and watched his car's taillights fade into the fog. The necklace still rested in my hand. The next morning I found myself writing again. Not a list this time, not documentation, just words. Forgiveness isn't about letting people back in. It's about letting yourself move forward. I closed the notebook and placed it beside the box. The day outside was bright, the ocean glittering like shards of glass. I felt something shift inside me, a small, steady calm that wasn't tied to justice or anger. Just being. Around noon, my phone rang again. I recognized the number immediately. Tammy, my niece. Ryan's daughter. Hi, Aunt Liv, she said, her voice soft but clear. I hope this isn't weird. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I swallowed hard. You don't owe me an apology, sweetheart. I do, she said quickly. Dad's been awful since everything happened. But I read those articles and I just wanted you to know I get it now. You weren't trying to hurt anyone. You were trying to survive. I smiled even though she couldn't see it. You sound older. I feel older, she said with a laugh. Mom started therapy. Grandma's part of a support group. It's small, but it's something. Her words landed soft and unexpected. And your dad, I asked carefully. He moved out of Seattle, trying to rebuild, whatever that means. He says he might visit you someday. I laughed quietly. We'll see about that. Anyway, she said, I just wanted to say thank you for showing me that being quiet isn't always the same as being kind. When the call ended, I sat there for a long while, the phone still warm in my hand. It felt strange, this cautious bridge stretching between past and present. Fragile maybe, but real. That night I walked along the beach alone. The air was cool and smelled of salt and cedar. The tide rolled low, leaving ribbons of foam along the sand. I slipped the necklace around my neck. It caught the faint moonlight, cold against my skin, then warm as it settled. I stood there watching the waves crash and pull back over and over. The rhythm felt like breathing. Behind me, the house glowed softly through the glass, steady alive. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by what I'd lost. I felt anchored by what I'd learned. Peace, I realized, wasn't a place you arrived. It was a tide you learned to live with. When I went back inside, the wind followed me through the door, curling around the candle flames until they flickered and steadied again. I poured a cup of tea, sat at my desk, and wrote one final line before bed. Some wounds don't close. They just stop bleeding when you stop picking at them. Outside, the moon hung low over the ocean, pale and certain. Inside, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming. The first morning of December broke soft and silver over the Pacific. Sunlight spilled across the windows, catching on the edges of my desk, the rim of my coffee cup, the glint of the seashell pendant resting against my throat. The air smelled like salt and cold, and for the first time in a year, I woke without dread pressing at my ribs. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ache anymore, it simply breathes. I made coffee and stood at the window watching the ocean roll in gentle waves toward the shore. Down the hill, the world was already waking, joggers and bright windbreakers. A couple walking their dog, a surfer carrying his board into the silver morning. Life had gone on without me worrying it might collapse. When I opened my laptop, the first email at the top of my inbox wasn't from lawyers or banks. It was from the community center in Malibu, the one where Rosa volunteered on weekends. Subject line: holiday dinner, December 24, volunteers needed. I smiled and typed back, count me in. I'll bring dessert. By noon, the sky was washed clean, the air bright and crisp. I drove into town for groceries, stopping by the small market near the pier. Familiar faces greeted me, Rosa behind the bakery counter, Mateo stacking crates of oranges. "Señorita Olivia," she called, waving a flour-dusted hand. "You'll come to the Christmas dinner?" "Yes, I wouldn't miss it," I said. She grinned. "Then you'll see how many people still talk about your feast by the sea." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Let them talk. It's a better story than the last one." Outside, the scent of pine and roasting coffee filled the air. Children ran past me with paper cups of cocoa, their laughter slicing through the breeze. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the sounds settle inside me. It was the opposite of the silence I once wielded. It was alive, warm, shared. That evening, as the sky darkened, I found myself pulling an old box from the back of the closet. Inside were folders labeled Frozen Justice Proof and Operation Silence, all the evidence that had once defined my survival. Screenshots, letters, statements, every piece of the life I had burned down to start anew. I sat on the floor for a long time, flipping through pages that no longer stung. They were artifacts, now fossils, of a version of me that fought with fire because she had no other weapon. When I finished, I dragged the entire folder onto my desktop, selected all the files, and pressed delete. A small pop-up appeared. "Are you sure you want to permanently remove these items?" "Yes," I said aloud and clicked confirm. The sound of the trash bin emptying was quiet, final, clean. The screen went still, leaving only my reflection, steady eyes, calm mouth light behind me instead of shadows. The next morning, I got a call from Rachel Carter. "You might want to check the ledger," she said, her voice warm. "They published a year-later feature on the Mitchell case. I thought you'd want to see it." I hesitated before opening it. The article was brief, tucked between holiday stories and local news. Elaine Mitchell returns to community service after health recovery. Family fund restructured to support domestic shelters across Washington. There was a photo, my mother, older, smaller, sitting at a folding table surrounded by volunteers, her hands sorting boxes of canned goods. For once, she wasn't posing. She was working. I didn't know whether to feel sadness or grace. Maybe both. That night, I stood on the balcony, the December air sharp against my skin. I touched the necklace at my throat, imagining her doing the same once upon a time. "Maybe this is what peace looks like," I whispered. Quiet but real. Christmas Eve came quickly. The community hall glowed like a lantern against the dusk, the windows fogged with warmth and laughter. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon cider and baked bread. Tables stretched across the room, covered in mismatched cloths and flickering candles. I joined Rosa and Mateo at the serving line, handing out plates of turkey and roasted vegetables to families, travelers, and strangers, who all looked a little less like strangers in the glow of the lights. Evelyn arrived halfway through, cheeks pink from the cold. "You still know how to make an entrance," she teased, handing me a tray of gingerbread cookies. "Old habits," I said, smiling. As the evening went on, music filled the hall, an old piano playing carols, slightly off-key, children laughing as they danced between tables. I poured cider, refilled plates, and felt something inside me loosen further with each thank you, each shared smile. Then, as I was setting down a tray, I heard someone call my name. "Olivia." I turned. Tammy stood near the doorway, her red scarf slipping from one shoulder, her expression unsure but hopeful. In her hands was an envelope. "Hi," I said, softly stepping toward her. "You made it." "She wanted you to have this," Tammy said, pressing the envelope into my hand. "Mom didn't know if you'd open it, but she asked me to bring it anyway." I nodded, the paper already warm from her touch. "Thank you." She hesitated, eyes searching mine. "She's trying, you know." Slowly. "I think she misses you." "I know," I said. "I miss her too. Just differently now." Tammy smiled faintly. "Maybe that's how it starts." She joined Mateo at one of the tables, their laughter blending into the crowd. I found a quiet corner and opened the envelope. Inside was a single card, handwritten in my mother's looping script. "I'm learning to listen. I'm sorry it took losing your voice to hear my own. Merry Christmas, Olivia." I traced the words with my thumb. No excuses, no dramatics, just that. I slipped the card into my coat pocket and stood there for a while watching the room glow with life. Later, a little girl tugged at my sleeve, holding up a tangled silver chain. "Can you help me with this?" she asked, her eyes wide. I smiled, crouching down to clasp it around her neck. "Pretty," I said. She grinned. "It was my mom's. She said it brings good luck. It will," I told her, adjusting the chain until it lay flat against her collarbone. "Just remember, it shines brightest when you stop hiding it." When she ran off, I caught my reflection in the window. The same pendant glimmered against my own collarbone, catching the candlelight. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of it. I felt its warmth. After everyone left and the hall grew quiet, I stepped outside. Snow was falling, thin, lazy flakes drifting through the orange glow of the streetlights. I walked to the middle of the street and tilted my head back, letting them land on my cheeks. The air was cold, but gentle. The kind that wakes you without wounding. In the stillness, I whispered, "They called me cold." But I was only waiting to thaw. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, the world around me hushed as if listening. When I got home, I placed my mother's card on my desk beside the empty notebook. The last page was still blank. I picked up my pen and wrote, "Peace isn't what you find after revenge. It's what you become when you no longer need it." Then I turned toward the window. The city lights shimmered in the distance, their reflections trembling like stars scattered across the dark water. I looked straight into the invisible lens of the moment, the one I'd spoken to since this story began, and said softly, "If you've ever been erased, I hope you know this silence can be survival. But truth is rebirth. And when you stop proving your worth, that's when you start living it." I let the words linger in the quiet. "Tell me," I whispered, smiling faintly, "what does peace look like for you?" The candle on the sill flickered, once steady and alive. Outside, snow blanketed the shore until even the footprints disappeared. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the one left out. I felt like the one who finally came home. Like, comment, stay a while, because the next story maybe will be yours.